Hey everyone, and welcome back to Men Can Be Anorexic. My name is Connor, and for this week's video, I'd like to talk about nutrition facts. More specifically, I'd like to talk about the tendency of people with anorexia to obsess over nutrition facts, to sort of fixate on them. But as always, before I say more, a quick trigger warning for anyone who's currently struggling with or recovering from anorexia, just because I might say some stuff that could potentially be upsetting or triggering, and of course the last thing I want to do with any of this content is put anyone in a bad place. During the spring of 2017, which was the second half of my sophomore year of college, my sister was studying abroad in Scotland. I finished up my exams in early May, and she wasn't scheduled to fly back to the States until early June, so we made plans, the two of us, to meet in Scotland and then fly to places like Paris and Florence. We did it on the cheap, and as you can imagine, it was a really amazing trip. But I was really struggling at that point in my life. A few days before I was scheduled to fly out of Boston, I went to the grocery store in my hometown to buy some protein bars that I could bring with me in my backpack. 2.5 years into recovery, at, as I've said, a really healthy, happy point in my life, I still think about that trip to the grocery store pretty often. If there's one single anecdote or experience from that initial struggle with anorexia that's permanently stuck in my brain, it's that one. Looking back on it, it was easily one of my worst days ever. The long and short of it basically is that I spent over an hour in the protein bar section of the grocery store. For a solid 80 or 90 minutes, I very carefully inspected the nutrition label on each and every protein bar package. I don't remember exactly, but I must have looked at each nutrition label at least 3 times. It sounds incredibly dramatic, but standing in that section of the grocery store, I was paralyzed. I was completely frozen with fear. The idea of picking one of these protein bar brands, it had me entirely overwhelmed. I would look at one of the options and think, wow, that's a lot of sugar. So I'd look at a second option and think, wow, that's a lot of sodium. So of course I'd look at a third option and think, wow, that's a lot of saturated fat. I was 19 years old, severely underweight, and completely obsessed with the nutrition facts on protein bar packages. I don't even know which one I picked in the end, I just know that I didn't feel good about it. I share this story because I think it illustrates something very important, and that is the extreme lengths someone with anorexia will sometimes go to just to feel okay about eating. Speaking from experience, there are times when the intensity of the fear of gaining just a single pound reaches such a high point that the idea of eating something like a protein bar without knowing exactly what's inside of it becomes completely unacceptable. For a lot of people, myself included, I think this is the root of this obsession with nutrition facts. Of course, this raises the question of what do you do if you notice a friend or a family member or a spouse obsessing over nutrition facts? And to be clear, I think there's a very important difference between casually glancing at nutrition facts every now and then and actually obsessing over them. A casual glance every now and then I think is totally harmless. I think it's a very normal thing that a lot of people do. I think it becomes a problem when it seems like this person in your life is unable to eat something without first looking at the nutrition facts and seeing what's inside it. I think that is indicative of a deeper problem, potentially indicative of an unhealthy relationship with food. My go-to advice for anyone who's watching this video out of concern for a friend or a loved one is to keep an eye on their behavior and see if this obsession with nutrition facts coincides with any other warning signs of anorexia. Of course, I'm neither a doctor nor a nutritionist, I am not an expert in this field, but I think it's very unlikely that this person in your life will demonstrate just one single warning sign. And if you begin to notice that this obsession with nutrition facts coincides with an addiction to exercise or a food ritual or restrictive portion sizes, I think that's indicative of a problem that warrants intervention. If that is in fact the case, I recommend being both sensitive and direct in your attempts to start a conversation with this person in your life. As I've said before, explicitly calling someone out as anorexic, especially if the two of you haven't talked about it before, isn't always the best idea. I think it can oftentimes lead to feelings of shame or embarrassment, and that could trigger even further unhealthy behavior. I think the best initial course of action is to lead with something a bit more tactful, a bit less direct, something along the lines of, it seems like you're a bit more interested in the nutrition labels on the foods you eat than you have been in the past. Are you feeling concerned about your health or your nutrition? Easily, without a doubt, one of the hardest parts of watching someone you love suffer from anorexia is that attempts like this to open a channel of communication often fall on deaf ears. And considering how dangerous anorexia can be, there definitely needs to be a sense of urgency in terms of starting the treatment or recovery process. So, if your initial attempts to start a conversation, this sort of tactful, more friendly, less direct approach, if that falls flat in its face, I think it becomes absolutely necessary to become more direct and candid with your conversations. You know what? I want to say something that I didn't write down, something I didn't plan, because right now I'm realizing that this is a very, very important thing. I recommend the softer, friendlier approach at first because I think it creates minimal shame and embarrassment, and it still creates the opportunity to talk with your loved one, maybe get them to open up about the way they've been thinking or feeling, and maybe discuss some avenues for help. That's the ideal scenario. However, if that falls flat in its face, if that friendlier approach does not work, I absolutely recommend more candor, more directness, because like I said, anorexia is extremely dangerous. Time is of the essence. There's not a whole lot of time to waste. So please, if that initial attempt does not work and it becomes clear that being sort of friendly, beating around the bush isn't going to work, I would drop that approach. I would get more candid, because yes, it could cause some shame, some embarrassment, could lead to some tension between you and your loved one. But when we're talking about something as dangerous as anorexia, I think that's the price you have to pay to get them the help they need. And I think I'm going to leave it on that note for today. As always, thank you so much for watching. Down in the description box, you'll find the phone number for the Anorexia, Nervosa, and Associated Disorders Hotline, which you or anyone you know can call if you're looking for immediate help. Thank you so much, and look out for the next video in which I'll be talking about veganism, which is something that I used as an excuse to restrict my eating. That's something that I know a lot of people with anorexia do, so it's definitely worth a conversation on this channel. Thanks so much, and see you then.